Hear that? Believe it or not, summer is just around the corner. Luckily, Armor All, America's most trusted auto appearance brand, has what your car needs to get that perfect summer shine. Plus, now through May 31st, we'll give you $5 for every $20 you spend on Armor All products. That means car wash pods, protectant, tire shine, you name it. Find out how to get your $5 rebate at armorall.com. Armor All, less work, more clean. Terms apply.
This week, we're resharing one of our listeners' favorite episodes from 2019. On January 6th, we'll be back with fresh episodes, including some big interviews that you don't want to miss. Stay safe and happy trails. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today Matt and Jero and I are going to be talking about mountain bike wheels. And before we get started, I should introduce Jero. Jero's a new staff writer at Singletracks. He's been writing for us for a long time. You've probably seen his articles under the byline Brian Jero, and we're stoked to have him joining us. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Jero.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to get started. It should be cool.
Yeah. Wheels are a topic that we have addressed on the podcast, but it's been a few years. And the last time we did, we heard from Dustin from Southern Wheelworks, where he talked about some wheel stuff, but we thought we'd kind of back it up this time and go over more of the basics about wheels, you know, just all the things you need to know and consider when you're shopping for new wheels or trying to maintain your wheels or all that good stuff. So let's start at like a super high level and talk about what's important when you design a set of mountain bike wheels. What are like the main considerations that you have when you're trying to think of like what makes a good mountain bike wheel?
I mean, I guess if I was looking to buy, this would depend on where I'm at in my mountain bike career, I suppose. Also, when I was just starting out, I would look for probably something more affordable. And now as I've gotten into it a little bit more, kind of balancing like what are the performance aspects of the wheel? How light is it? Does it come with decent hubs? Yeah. How light, how stiff? Those are kind of things that I look at a little bit more.
Yeah. What about you, Jero? I mean, when you think about a mountain bike wheel, what does it have to do? It has to roll, obviously, but like what makes it unique from other wheels, I guess?
So I guess another thing I would consider is what I'm going to use the wheel for. So I ride on a lot of really rocky trails with a bigger trail bike or enduro bike. So I want a wheel that's going to stay straight and true as long as possible and going to be able to bang through all those rocks for quite a while.
Yeah.
Something that's going to take a beating. So I'm looking for something pretty durable.
Yeah. And mountain bike wheels especially, I mean, there's a lot of yucky conditions that they're going to be put through. So you're going to get like water and dirt and stuff. And so, yeah, you need to have like the bearings that are going to last and that are well sealed up and everything. And that's that durability piece. And it's just like any other mountain bike component. You know, you got durability, performance. For wheels, that means they need to roll efficiently, right? Like you don't want it to be gummed up or anything like that. And efficiency also is something you consider in terms of like the flexibility of the wheel. Like you don't want a lot of your energy going into the wheel deflecting, like when you're really mashing on the pedals. And then, you know, the thing that makes mountain bike gear expensive is the weight. Nobody wants to be pushing around a really heavy wheel. So the designers have to do everything they can to keep that wheel weight down, particularly rotational weight. I'm learning about this with Pinewood Derby. I'm designing a Pinewood Derby car with my son. And
oh, sweet.
Yeah, and rotational weight apparently is a big thing. Like you sand down the little plastic wheels to like get them as light as possible. And it's the same thing with mountain bike wheels. And then, yeah, Jero, too, you're going to say something about where the components are made and how they're assembled, right? How does that play into a good set of mountain bike wheels?
Well, I've certainly had better luck with hand-built wheels as opposed to machine-built wheels, and also just wheels that are built to a really tight tolerance with the whole setup of the hub being designed around tolerances that are going to last for a long time. You know, nothing's going to get baggy. The wheel's not going to wobble. You don't have to tighten presets all the time. So
right.
There's a lot of factors that go into that. But then additionally, just looking for, you know, maybe hubs that are built in the United States or built in the UK or, you know, somewhere where you can have the wheels built to a specific spec that you're looking for.
Yeah. Well, you live in Italy. You didn't say Italy. Do they not make good wheels there?
There are a few wheel companies here, but none of them are very large, and it's certainly easier to get hand-built wheels from a company like Chris King or Hope that are kind of the exact spec you're looking for what you need.
Yeah. Well, let's dive in and talk about the parts that make up a wheel set and kind of talk about some of the considerations for each part, explain maybe a little bit about how it works, if that's important. So let's start at the edge of the wheel, the rim. What does the rim do, Matt?
I guess you can't have a complete wheel without spokes, hubs, or a rim, but yeah, I mean, a rim is basically the piece that's gonna get you going on the bike.
Yeah.
And hold your tire on, because I guess it'd be pretty awful to ride on just a rim without a tire too.
Yeah.
So rims are pretty important. But yeah, I mean, you're starting there, and then also considering whether you're going to go with a more tubeless compatible rim also. And do you want to do tubeless or not? And then look at the B type to see if that's really going to be the best setup for tubeless, if that's something you're going to consider.
Yeah. What does that mean when a rim is tubeless or tubeless compatible? What does that have to do with on the rim itself?
Well, the B designs have changed a lot over time also, right? Was it Mavic did UST like a long time ago originally, and it was more of like a hooked bead, right? That kind of held the tire into the rim. And now you're kind of seeing that go away a little bit, or at least get a little bit more subtle with how the rim bead designs are.
Yeah. And you also, I mean, the rim itself is going to have a lot of holes. Obviously, the spokes are attached to the rim. And so you're going to need some kind of tape to seal up that side of the rim to make it tubeless. And there are a lot of different ways you can do that. These days, most wheels are going to come with the rims already taped up and tubeless ready. But if they're not, if you have an older set of wheels or a set of wheels that just didn't come that way for whatever reason, it is possible to do that yourself. Have you done that, Jero? Have you ever converted a wheel set and made it tubeless?
Yeah, so at the beginning, when I first started trying to set up tires tubeless, we would take a tube, blow it up, cut it down the middle, and then put a tire on, set it up tubeless, and cut off the remaining tube that was left over. That was kind of one of the first ways to set it up. And then switch to what I still do today, is just put a bunch of Gorilla Tape on there until it's tight and
nice,
and go for it. There are also rim manufacturers like Crank Brothers that make rims a little differently. They don't have any spoke holes. Instead, they have built-in nipples that'll hold the spoke. Mm-hmm. And so you don't have to deal with covering the holes. It's just a solid surface inside.
Yeah. And are these carbon rims, or are there alloy rims that are that way too?
I'm not sure if their carbon rims are set up that way. I've only had their alloy rims, but it's pretty convenient for sure.
Cool. Yeah, you mentioned Gorilla Tape. One of the Singletracks readers mentioned in the forums that they found the Gorilla Tape like breaks down over time. And he seemed to kind of hint that maybe it was something to do with the sealant. Have you ever had that problem with Gorilla Tape, like just disintegrating?
I have had a problem with it moving over time for sure. As the tire comes off and you switch tires, eventually you need to change the tape because it starts to push down in toward the center of the rim. And that's kind of where you need you need to have space for the tire to go there so you can get it off and on.
Right. Interesting.
Definitely have to be swapped out.
Yeah. And then Matt, you're talking about the different rim profiles, like the hooked rim versus a hookless rim. Do either of you guys like have a good way to explain what that looks like? And I have a hard time even understanding how a hookless rim actually works. It seems like the tire would just slide right off, but somehow it doesn't, right?
I mean, it seems like there's enough pressure in there now. And I mean, I guess it's easier to explain if you're talking about like a hooked rim, to where the bead kind of hooks itself towards the inside of the rim, and then the bead on the tire is round all the way around the tire and is sort of pressurized under that hook, so that my guess is that was like the easiest way to design a tubeless seal at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe for the hookless rims, they're making a taller rim wall so that the tire can't, like, there's just not a way for the tire to get over the side of the rim.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. Interesting. So yeah, we kind of skipped over it, but what materials are generally used for rims? Obviously there's carbon these days. That's the more expensive option, but there are other options as well, right?
For sure. I personally prefer alloy. I don't have to deal with worrying about it breaking quite as much. And when an alloy rim goes out of round, which means it kind of starts to turn into an egg shape, you can bang it back out. So say if you're in an enduro race and you're only allowed to use one wheel for the whole race, front and rear, and you get a big ding in your rim and you're not able to keep a tire on, you need to be able to pound that back out, which you can't do with a carbon wheel.
Interesting. I guess the obvious advantage of a carbon rim over alloy would be that it's lighter weight, but I've also heard that it's a lot stiffer. And as a mountain biker, maybe that seems a little weird. You know, we spend a lot of money to make our bikes less stiff, right? Like adding suspension and stuff like that.
Squishier.
Yeah, squishier. But there is an advantage to having stiff wheels, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to roll a lot faster, you can take corners a little bit harder. That was one of the... A few years ago, I switched from a set of alloy rims to a set of NVs, and it was like, yeah, it was a crazy, crazy change to get used to just because they were so much stiffer and like cut corners so much quicker than alloys did. It was, yeah. For anybody that switches over from like alloy to carbon, it takes some getting used to.
Yeah, and so I kind of touched on it earlier, but obviously they're going to be more efficient in terms of your pedaling. Like the wheels aren't going to be flexing at all when you're putting those pedaling forces in. And then it also does help with handling as well. You know, you're going to be much more precise with your wheels. They're not going to be mushy when you try to, you know, turn them one way or the other. They're going to instantly respond. And a lot of people like that feel. But then, like you said, Jero, there are disadvantages with carbon that, you know, it's not really repairable.
I'm curious too how things are changing in terms of stiffness between alloy and carbon rims now that lacing profiles are becoming more symmetrical. Boost spacing front and rear.
Right.
You don't have one side of the wheel with drastically shorter spokes and the ability for it to flex more in one direction than the other. I'd be curious to ask some wheel designers how that's affecting rigidity.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, well, we'll talk about spokes and lacing stuff up next. Before we move on, are there any products that are designed to protect rims from rock strikes? I mean, especially if you're investing in a set of carbon hoops, they're pricey. You know, prices have come down a little bit. They used to be, you know, you're looking at spending $2,500 for a set of carbon wheels. Nowadays, you can get a good set for $1,500, but still, there's definitely that chance that you're going to damage them from rock strikes. So, what is one of the ways that people are trying to combat that?
Yeah, I mean, you can throw in a set of inserts now, like Cushcore, which I keep telling my buddy to do because he's got a set of carbon wheels and still runs his tires at like 40 PSI.
Just to protect the rim.
Put an insert in, man. Yeah, I mean, those tire inserts are getting super popular now, and a good way to kind of lower the concern about damaging a rim and run your tire pressures where they should be to get the benefits, you know, low 20s or mid 20s and not worry about cracking a rim.
Yeah.
So it's definitely help.
Have you had any experience with those, Jero?
Yeah, I have. It seems to be a pretty wide variation of the way that they're made, but they're kind of like a flat strip or a round pool noodle looking thing.
Yeah. And
I've used both. I recently had one made by a small Italian company that's more the pool noodle style. And that worked really well until it didn't. It started to soak up all of the sealant at some point, got enough punctures in it that it just wasn't working in terms of the tubeless setup anymore, but it was still protecting the rim.
Yeah.
And now I have one of the flat ones from Cafe Latex that just zip ties together and sits between the tire and the rim, and it seems to be working really well. And it also doesn't seem to affect the lateral flex of the tire as much, which is nice. So maybe if you needed to, you could throw it in your front tire as well and not worry about it affecting traction as much.
Yeah, I've tried some of them as well, some of the inserts, and yeah, they seem to work pretty well, and it takes a lot of the pressure off of me. I feel like I ride a little bit more confidently, and you know, I'm not afraid of banging into stuff. You know, I just feel like I can ride a little bit faster and not have to worry about damaging my wheels at all. And also there are benefits obviously to the tire itself. You know, you're not going to get as many pinch flats or things like that. So there's definitely an advantage. And not only that, a lot of these carbon rims these days have some sort of warranty on them. So I think that was something that kept adoption rates kind of low early on with carbon rims. You know, people were afraid that they were going to damage them and it's going to be this like catastrophic failure. And so most of the companies offer some sort of warranty, at least from like manufacturing defects, which is kind of bogus if you ask me, because obviously, yeah, if they didn't make it right, then obviously they should take it back. But a lot of them extend to, you know, more normal damage. You know, if you have a rock strike or something, a lot of times they're going to take care of you. So that's nice.
Yeah, when I bought my Envies a few years ago, I bought them secondhand, so I saved a lot of money, but I mean, there was still a lot. And then I ended up cracking the rear rim in an enduro race. Oh. I was like, great, I can't use the warranty at all because I'm not the original buyer.
Right.
But luckily, there's a couple of people that do carbon repair around here and helped me get it patched back up.
Nice. Are you still running those wheels?
No. Yeah, I took the hubs off of because they're Chris Kings, and I really like Chris Kings. And I think like this dirt jumper guy bought them because they're 26.
Oh, nice. That's cool.
Maybe they're still going.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, especially on a dirt jump bike, that seems like that could potentially be kind of rough on a set of wheels.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, let's move on from the rim to the spokes. So obviously spokes connect your rim to your hub. And one of the things, you know, if you look at a set of wheels, it seems like the spokes are kind of like pushing up from the hub to the rim, if that makes sense. But really there's tension on them, right? They're actually kind of pulling on the rim itself, right?
Yeah, that's a pretty big design consideration. When I was in Vermont last year, we visited a wheel builder, and Jerry Shabbat, who builds Next wheels, and like that was a really that was probably the biggest consideration for him building a wheel is the spoke tension process, because he actually just uses, like, he sends his own design to a Chinese carbon manufacturer, and so kind of get some flack from that. But he's like, well, that's like a minor part of it, and if you get the tension just the way you want it all the way around the wheel, then I mean that makes an even bigger difference in like the ride quality and in the ride feel of the wheel.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, what determines like the number of spokes that you use in a wheel? I mean, it seems like we're seeing spoke counts come down a lot. If you look at like a wheel from a long time ago, it's gonna be full of spokes, or even like inexpensive wheel sets, they tend to have a lot more spokes. So what determines that number, how many you use?
I think part of that is, again, the use, what you're going to use the wheel for and what kind of bike it's going to be on. A lot of trail and enduro bikes have 32, 34 spoke wheels, whereas some cross-country wheels will be a lot lower. Mm-hmm. And there are also companies who are running 3-cross spoke patterns on one side of a wheel and then straight pull on the other side. So there's just seems to be endless options for engineers to choose from, and all sorts of different reasons why they go with different patterns.
Yeah. Spoke lacing is one of those things that's really interesting to me, you know, the design consideration, and there are all these different patterns. I mean, it's almost like an art form. So what materials are people generally going to be using for spokes?
As far as I know, they're all steel for the most part. There's a few companies running alloy. Industry 9 has got some alloy spokes in all kinds of really cool colors, but any wheel you're going to buy off the shelf is generally going to be steel. Yeah.
Well, you just sent me yesterday a link to a set of carbon wheels, right? Where I guess they aren't spokes, they're blades when you make them out of carbon, right? But they're like the old Spinergy wheels, but those are still around, right?
The Spinergy wheels are still around, yeah. I think they might be using aluminum spokes. I'm not positive. And that set that other set that I sent you was, I guess we would call them mag wheels. The Spangle wheels with the 3 different kind of big carbon blades.
Yeah.
Yeah, those things are cool.
Yeah.
They look a little scary in terms of getting sticks between those blades, but
Right.
Right.
Be cool to test out.
Yeah. Well, at Sea Otter last year, we saw the wheel set from Synchros, Scott Synchros, that the whole thing is carbon, from the spokes. I don't know if they call them spokes, but the whole thing is like molded together, the rim and the spoke and basically the hub shell. So I guess you can kind of use carbon, but you can't just buy like loose carbon spokes or anything in case you're hoping to do that, hoping to like upgrade your wheel set with carbon spokes. Are there advantages we didn't really talk about it, but they're basically different shapes of spokes, and some are going to be bladed where they're kind of flat profile, and then the more common one is round spokes. Are there advantages to one shape or another?
The blades are super aero.
Yeah.
Less wind resistance.
Right. I think also there's some bladed spokes that are quite a bit lighter.
Right.
I think most brands, their lightest spoke will be a bladed spoke, and then they kind of go up from there to triple-butted, double-butted spokes.
Yeah.
And the bladed ones can be more like torsionally flexy, right? Or flexible.
Yeah, that I don't know. That's it's all part of the magic of wheel building. That is
Right.
an amazing thing to learn about and equally difficult to do.
Yeah, I had a wheel set that used bladed spokes, and I don't know if they were like proprietary too. There just aren't as many of them out there. So it does make it harder when you need to like replace a spoke. You take it to your local bike shop and they're going to have to order some of these spokes. And the other thing I found out is spokes, you can't just buy like one spoke, like even a bike shop can't. And so some of the repairs I've had to do that, the shop comes back and they're like, well, we need to buy like 5 of these spokes and we need you to pay for them because like we don't have a use for these after you. So
Dang.
that can be kind of a problem if you don't use standard sort of spoke profiles and spoke shapes. And then the other thing to know about them too is they're all like different lengths and they attach to the rim in different ways. Matt, you're going to talk about J-bends, right? Like spokes that have a bend on them are a little bit different in their advantages to the shape on that, right?
Yeah, and I guess like the layup and how J-bends in a way will cross over each other maybe several times and support each other, kind of push against each other and tension the wheel. Mm-hmm. It makes it a little bit more difficult to actually swap the spoke if you need, but they actually do play a role in making a significant difference in actually tensioning the wheel. Yeah,
and the other form is straight pull spokes, and those are basically, they're just completely straight, right, Jero?
Yeah, the head of the spoke, there's usually like a seat that the spoke sits in inside the hub, mm-hmm. and it's just a direct straight tension. I don't know, I know that they're lighter, and sometimes hub manufacturers can make the hub a little lighter when they use straight pull. I'm not sure about other advantages to them though.
Interesting. And then finally, how are the spokes attached to the rim?
Most companies either are using brass or alloy nipples, and the nipple length is specific to the spoke length, and you're kind of taking up the extra space between the rim and the hub with the nipple as well.
Right.
But all those measurements have to be pretty precise.
Yeah.
And then there are companies like Mavic that some of their wheels have a built-in nipple that the spoke goes into. Mm-hmm. And then you tension it essentially the same way that you would a normal spoke. But again, there might not, in some of those wheels, there aren't holes on the inside to run the spoke through. So you run the spoke through the outside.
Right.
And those are all proprietary as well. Like you were saying, if you need spare spokes, you're not going to find them just anywhere.
Right.
You gotta have your own spokes with you.
Yeah, and some of those can be pretty tricky from what I understand. Wheels are like one thing that I do not work on myself. There are parts of them that you're supposed to be able to work on yourself. Like you can use a spoke wrench to like change the tension on spokes if you got a little bit of a wobble. But yeah, I personally don't mess with that stuff. But what I understand is some of these new rim profiles, like you were talking about, Jero, that there's no spoke hole on the inside. It's basically like a sealed channel almost. And from what I understand, to attach the spokes in some cases, or if you have to replace one, you have to like drop the nipple inside and use a magnet to like bring it around to the right spot. And like, I don't know, it just sounds crazy.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, there are some where the nipple's even built into the rim.
Oh, right.
And so you're just threading directly into that. But then again, if that built-in proprietary nipple breaks, you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, I wonder how difficult that is.
Yeah. Do either of you guys know why brass? I mean, that seems to be the more common material that's used for nipples. And that's, as far as I know, that's the only thing on a bike that is made out of brass. Is there any reason for that material that you guys know of?
Yeah, when I've worked in shops in the past, the folks that built wheels would say that it lasts a lot longer. You don't have to deal with the corrosion issues of aluminum.
Right.
Especially with getting sealant stuck inside the rim and then sitting on the head of the nipple. It can really corrode the top of it, and then you end up breaking the nipple. So brass is not supposed to be as susceptible to those things.
Yeah.
Is it a little heavier then, or?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, why not just make bikes out of brass and all that?
Right. It'll last forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly where my mind was going. But yeah, I bet a brass bike would be pretty heavy, like a brass bell.
Yeah, and my grandma would go after it to add to her brass collection.
Nice.
All right, so now we're getting to the core of the wheel, right in the middle, the hubs. So the hub obviously is the thing that holds everything together. All the spokes run into the hub. What are the differences between the front and the rear hub, Jero?
The front hub is pretty basic. It's just, it's got either a center lock or a 6-bolt to put a rotor on, a couple of bearings, and an axle, and usually that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas the rear will have all of that, and then a free hub body, which is what the cassette goes onto and is tightened onto. And that has its own 2 or more larger bearings, sometimes a 2-piece axle, and then some hubs, Chris King in particular, have different preload adjustments so that you can adjust how much tension goes on the bearings. And as the bearings seat in their place, you can tighten them a little more and different things like that. So there's quite a few more elements to a rear hub.
Right. When we talk about rear hubs, a lot of times, one of the marketing stats, I guess, that you'll see from brands is the engagement, the amount of engagement. What does that mean exactly, Matt?
Yeah, so when you're talking about engagement, you're really talking about, how many of the pawls on the inside of the rear hub are contacting like the ratchet mechanism. And then it comes down to a matter of degrees, to where if you turn the wheel a certain amount of degrees, are those pawls going to be making contact with the ratchet? So
right.
Better hubs are going to have more smaller teeth and pawl mechanisms, and cheaper hubs are going to have bigger and less. So you're talking about having to turn the crank more to get it to engage with the rear hub. It's just less responsive than a higher end hub with a lot more engagement.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain it, that it is a ratcheting mechanism where, it can turn in one direction, but then in the other direction, it will not turn because those pawls, which are basically, they're like little levers that are going to engage with a tooth to kind of like backstop it. And so, yeah, the more of those that you have, the more engagement, more quickly the wheel's going to engage when you're ready to pedal. So what advantage is there to a high degree of engagement? I mean, beyond just, I guess it's simple, right? I guess the advantage is you can get it to engage more quickly when you're ready to pedal. The second you put that power down, it's going right into the wheel, right?
Yeah, Jero and I were just chatting about this, I think, the other week. So we were complaining about OEM hubs, and I guess we're just kind of like hub snobs now, but it makes a big difference, especially like
totally
if you're at speed and you're trying to pedal and pick up more speed. You really have to like crank down that much harder to get it to engage. And I like it for technical climbing too, when I'm kind of like repositioning my feet to get up rocks and stuff like that. Like I can get it to engage a little bit quicker.
Yeah,
I would say for technical climbing, that seems to be the spot where it's most noticeable. Some kind of junky hubs, if you coast at all, you'll go to put power down on the pedal and get a quarter of a turn from your crank before anything happens. And by that time, like the rock that was right in front of you stopped your tire and you fall over. So it can make a big difference in those situations.
Yeah. I like to imagine the advantages when you're in those, like, you're trying to do like trialsy moves, where you're like on the pedals and like trying to balance and get like just the right pedal stroke at the right time so you're not banging into a rock. I imagine like trials bikes, they must have crazy good engagement. I don't know. I haven't ridden one. And then we saw from Industry 9, the news recently was about their new hub, the Hydra.
Yeah.
It's got like a crazy amount of engagement.
690 points.
Yeah. That's a lot of tiny little teeth basically inside that hub that are working for you. So yeah, and what's interesting, I feel like there's more advantage to having better engagement for mountain biking because of the reasons we said, technical terrain and things demand that you're able to engage the wheel more responsively maybe than road biking. Although I guess if you're racing or, at a different level, maybe it comes in play as well. But I feel like for mountain biking, the amount of engagement is super important.
For sure. I would imagine in cyclocross, it could be really helpful as well. Anytime you're riding in a lot of mud and you have to, do some like kick stops and one-footed pedaling and funny things like that, it's probably pretty helpful.
So yeah, while we're talking about engagement, why are some hubs really buzzy and then others are not? I mean, they're all using essentially the same mechanism with these teeth that are kind of going up and down inside the hub. Why are some louder than others?
A big part of it's just to do with the engagement. I mean, you have more points of engagement and more teeth in contact, then you're just going to get more of like a rapid fire sound that doesn't have as much engagement.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can even make it louder if you want.
Oh, yeah.
You take the free hub off and clean all the grease out, and then just put a lighter grease in. It'll get louder. You can also take the springs that push against the pawls and bend them so they push harder.
Ah, interesting.
There's all kinds of little tricks like that. And at the same time, you can quiet down by just adding some heavier grease.
Interesting.
That's something I always had problems with, I guess, sort of problems with on my Chris Kings, is because, after a while, dirt builds up in there and you lose like a lot of the engagement. So with the Chris Kings that I had, at least like every few months, I'd have to take out, re-grease them. And you could tell because they'd start skipping engagement and then they would get a lot more quiet. And then you clean them out, put a new grease in, and you get that angry bee sound back.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because each brand, especially the bigger, more well-known hub brands, tend to be known by their sound. I mean, a lot of people, I have Industry 9s on one of my bikes, and oftentimes I'll be coasting by somebody and they'll be like, oh, Industry 9, like you know it just by sound. And I feel like companies do, it's almost like Harley Davidson, I mean, they tune their motorcycles to have that Harley sound, and I think Chris King was probably one of the first ones to do that. I remember many years ago, must have been 15 years ago, I first heard somebody rolling by with those on the trail, and I thought, oh man, something's wrong with their bike. Like, it shouldn't be making that much noise. But it's like, no, Chris King does that on purpose. Like, that's how it's supposed to sound. And we've gotten used to that. Yeah, that signature sound. And some people, they like a really buzzy hub. Some people don't. It's good to know you can tune that out. But it's also good to know there's nothing wrong with it. It's okay for it to make that noise.
Yeah, maybe at some point Shimano will have a hub that's silent. We'll see.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the promise. Yeah, none of them are completely silent that I've seen myself, but yeah, it seems like we're getting close.
For sure.
So let's talk a little bit about axle standards. So the axle obviously is the thing that goes through the middle of the hub and the thing that attaches to your frame. This is actually good timing because Giroud just wrote an article about converting different axles and axle widths and diameters.
Boostinating.
Yeah. So can most wheels be converted to work with like different axle sizes, like quick release or through axle, and also like new standards like boost?
Yeah, most wheels can be converted from one standard to another. Maybe not a lot of them, not from quick release to boost. Kind of depends on the wheel.
Right.
There are a few wheels that can pull that off. But most of them can go, say, from 142 by 12 in the rear to 148 with a couple of spacers either on one side where you have to redish the wheel or on both sides.
Is there an advantage to doing it one way or the other? Why wouldn't you just do the symmetrical one where it's a lot less work?
I think the idea of doing the asymmetrical one is those versions add a spacer to the non-drive side, allowing you to have the same chain line that the frame was designed around. So if your frame's designed for a boost chain ring, and a chain line for a boost hub, that puts your cog set over where it's going to line up properly.
Oh, right.
And your shifting will function properly.
Yeah, interesting. And I know a lot of the older wheels, the before boost, when we were kind of moving from quick release to through axles, I know a lot of the wheel sets would ship with like different end caps. So you could run quick release, or you could run, 15 millimeter, some even a 20. I think I've got some wheel sets that run the old 20 millimeter axle. So it just depends on your wheel set, I guess. I mean, there's no standard in terms of like how that goes together, right?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a standard of future proofing necessarily. You kind of get what comes with the wheel set, and if you get a new bike, sometimes you can make it work, and sometimes you have to swap out your hubs.
Yeah, and in your research, it looks like you found some companies are addressing this more than others, right? There are some that they do design, or they are designing their newer hubs so that they're expandable or changeable down the line if they need to be, right?
Yeah, for sure. Hope and Spank are two that I found that the majority of, if not all of their hubs, you can change the end caps and switch things around and make them work for almost any bike.
Yeah, that's good to know. So the hubs too, I mean, beyond just being like part of the wheel, they're also connected to your brakes and to your drivetrain. So there are different rotor mount standards. Matt, what are the two rotor standards that people need to know about when they're choosing a wheel set or a hub?
It's pretty much just 6-bolt or center lock. And the 6-bolt's just 6 little torque bolts around the rotor. Center lock is like, it's almost, I'm not sure how to describe that design, but it's like a sprocket design essentially, where you'd like slide the rotor onto the hub, and then you have to get a special tool to actually like crank the ring around
crank the lock ring down.
Yeah, right. It's a lock ring versus 6 little Torx bolts that attaches it on there. And the tool that you use, I always forget. Most of my bikes that I use don't run center lock, but it's is it the bottom bracket tool, or it's a tool that you would use for other stuff, or is it the cassette tool?
I think it's a center lock tool.
Yeah. It depends. I have one bike, for example, where the front is a 200 millimeter rotor and it's center lock, and you use a bottom bracket tool for that one. And then the rear takes a cassette tool. So it just kind of depends on the lock ring, actually.
Yeah. That's why I was confused, because I feel like I've done it both ways, and I was like, wait, which one is it?
Yeah, I haven't used center lock much at all.
Yeah, and that's Shimano, right? Are all Shimano rotors center lock, or do they have some of both?
They have 6-bolt too, right?
Yeah, they have 6-bolt as well. I think it's DT Swiss that really pushes center lock more than anyone else. And XTRs for sure, all center lock, but everything else you can get 6-bolt.
Yeah, interesting. So that's definitely something to check when you're getting a new wheel set. Are your brakes going to work with it, and do you need to get a new tool? So also drivetrain. So when we're talking about the rear wheel, we kind of touched on it when we're talking about chain line and things like that. But what are the drivetrain considerations when you're looking at a rear hub?
So one consideration is that often on boost frames, your chainstays are further apart. And so you might have to use a boost chain ring or crankset. Mm-hmm. So for example, I have a crankset from Rotor that has a boost. Instead of having a boost chain ring, it uses a boost axle that's a bit wider.
Okay.
So that just space it out so that the chain ring doesn't hit the chainstay.
Yeah, and then you also the big one that I know I've run into before when looking at drivetrain stuff is the driver bodies. So you have either the standard splined driver body, which is a standard, I guess, created by Shimano. I don't know, popularized, who knows? But it's the one that Wheels used for a very long time. And then when SRAM came out with 11-speed drivetrains, they introduced what was known as the XD driver, which only works with these SRAM cassettes that are XD compatible. And so generally that involves, most times it involves getting a new hub set, right? It's not easy to just change out the driver body on a hub, is it?
No, it can be pretty expensive process to do that also.
Yeah, that one kind of depends on the hub manufacturer. Sometimes you can switch between, I think the Shimano one's called an HG driver.
Okay.
Not positive on that. And then the SRAM XD sometimes can just be swapped out. And I know on a Hope hub I have, you can even just pull it off by hand and put the other one on.
Yeah.
They're not, I mean, the drivers are not inexpensive. They're anywhere from $60 to $100. But
Oh, wow. But yeah, I mean, it is good to see manufacturers thinking about that in terms of the design, making parts swappable, because there are so many different standards these days in terms of spacing and driver bodies and all that stuff. And it's tough when you spend a lot of money on a good set of wheels to have to toss them out or rebuild them, like completely take the wheel apart just to like put a different hub in it.
Yeah, that was a problem I had with the Chris Kings, because I was trying to set it up with a SRAM cassette, and the Chris Kings are made to work with Shimano, like engineered to work with Shimano drivers. And so like to buy an XD driver for a Chris King hub is like a few $100.
Yeah. Jeez.
Yeah, they're pricey.
Yeah, one of the other things when it comes to hubs too that you can get is a dynamo hub. And this is something that bike packers like to use. It's a little generator that goes inside the hub. And obviously it makes the hub a lot heavier because there's all kinds of copper wiring inside there and everything. But what it allows you to do is to power like a light or charge your phone or whatever you need while you're rolling on the bike. And so that's a popular option. They're generally pretty expensive. I want to say $500 or more for one of those, but it could be a good thing if you're building up a set of wheels. It could be a good thing to throw in there. It is going to add a little bit of resistance when you're drawing power from it. So that is a consideration. And it's always, as far as I know, it's always in the front that you could put a dynamo hub, not in the rear. And then one other thing, there are geared hubs as well, right? Roll-off is one of the main ones that people know, where basically there's a drivetrain inside the hub, which gives your bike a much cleaner chain line and look to it and everything. Everything is like sealed up inside, and those things are mega heavy, but they are pretty cool, pretty interesting engineering.
yeah, they seem like they'd be really nice for folks who ride a lot in the mud or just generally live somewhere where the weather's not great.
Yeah.
Not have to deal with their drivetrain cleaning all the time.
Yeah, they do. What I've found, I've only spent limited time trying these geared hubs out, but they do change the handling of the bike. It puts a lot more weight on the hub. And so I don't know if that's necessarily a good or a bad thing, but it is something that riders, I'm sure, have to get used to and kind of adjust how they handle on the bike. Well, we're going to take a break real quick, but when we come back, we're going to talk about mountain bike wheel diameters, rim widths, and we'll also offer some tips for troubleshooting your mountain bike wheels. Stay tuned. Join Singletracks at Mulberry Gap in North Georgia, March 23rd through 24th, 2019 for our annual get-together, the Ride and Rally. We designed this event so that mountain bikers at all levels can ride new trails, try new bikes, learn new skills, and make new friends. Registration includes access to many skills clinics by Ninja Mountain Bike Performance, food and shuttles from Mulberry Gap, Sweetwater Beer, specialized demo bikes, and commemorative swag. And the event benefits the North Georgia Mountain Bike Association. The Ride and Rally is limited to 74 riders, and lodging at Mulberry Gap will fill up quickly, so sign up today. Go to singletracks.com/RNR to register for one or both days of the Ride and Rally. That's singletracks.com/RNR. See you there. And we're back. So we've gone this entire episode talking about mountain bike wheels, and I don't think we've said anything about wheel diameters, which is kind of awesome, because it's like that was the conversation for, I don't know, years and years. I mean, 10 years probably, honestly. Like, I think I got my first 29er 10 years ago, and they had been out for a while then even. So this is a long time that wheel diameter has been a thing. So is one wheel size better than another when it comes to mountain biking?
In short, I'm going to say no. I think it comes down to preference. Spending like a lot of time on, I have like 227 bikes upstairs right now, and then still have like a lot of 29ers coming in for review. And I still see the benefits in both.
Yeah.
I rode the first 27.5 bike that I've ever spent any real amount of time on just this winter, riding the GT Force. And I'd always kind of assumed that it doesn't matter. I would just get used to whatever wheel size I'm riding, and I might ride a little differently, but I'm not really going to notice it much after a while. And I still believe that after riding this bike, it doesn't matter that much to me. I think I have to, in really rough sections, I might have to hop the bike around a little bit more and plow the line a little bit less than I would on a 29er, but you have to ride every bike a little differently, and I don't feel like the wheel size is maybe the biggest factor in this bike.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely one of those things you don't want to like stress too much about, like if you're going to pick the right one or the wrong one when it comes to wheel diameter. But in my opinion, I just want to pick one and stick with it, just to keep things simple in terms of like tires and, spare tubes and wheel sets and like all that stuff. So yeah, you're not going to be wrong if you pick 27.5 or you pick 29 or even 26. Just stick with whatever you pick. That's my advice, I guess.
Yeah, that's exactly why I've always ridden 29ers. I already had the wheels. I had spare tires. I didn't want to spend all the money to change all that over.
Yeah, I mean, I guess people are afraid, and there's that risk that one of these is just going to disappear. I mean, 26 has kind of done that. I mean, it's still there, and it always will be, I'm sure, but it is finally getting harder to find, every latest and greatest wheel in a 26-inch diameter. But yeah, it seems unlikely that that's going to happen to either the 27.5 or the 29er size.
Yeah, and there's new tire versions that are coming out that just don't have 26-inch options. For
sure. There are also some tires you can't get in a 29. It's not as common, but it seems a little strange that, I don't know, I guess some tread patterns must just work better specifically for 27.5 or 29. I'm not sure why that is.
Or the companies are just saving up their money to make a new mold for the wheel, right? Like, yeah, a lot of them, they'll come out with just one diameter initially because it is expensive to have multiple molds for each diameter. And so, yeah, it seems like over time, eventually you're gonna have it available. But it also depends on who's buying, if a tire's not selling well or whatever. Who knows how all those decisions work. So speaking of tires, one of the things I forgot to ask and talk about was rim width. How does that relate to tires specifically? It seems like these days we are talking a lot less about rim diameter, but we're starting to talk about the rim width, which is actually, if you stand a wheel up and you measure like from side to side of the rim, there's a lot of variation in that now, right? So how does that affect tire performance?
Rims seem to have gone a little bit wider, even for XC, to where maybe back in the day, like downhill was like a downhill rim was like 25 millimeters, and now you're seeing XC racers run 25 millimeter widths. Mm-hmm. Enduro riding has definitely gone up, and yeah, it just expands the tire a little bit more. You get more traction, easier to turn. I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
It kind of squares off the tire profile and gets the shoulder knobs closer to the ground, so you don't have to lean the bike over quite as far to get it to hook up on the big knobs when you're in a turn.
Right. Well, do you guys think that the rim widths are increasing so that people can run bigger tires, or is it just so they can get better performance out of the same size tires they were running before?
There's definitely wider options out there now. Yeah, like 2.6 inch have gotten like tremendously popular. And I mean, Santa Cruz, even you can buy a Bronson with like 2.6 inch front and back as an option, or you can just do like a 2.4 and 2.5 as a tire option also. But I mean, that's kind of how big 2.6 has gotten, is now you can buy a complete bike that comes standard with 2.6 like front and rear, because people enjoy running that width.
Yeah, and I mean, it should go without saying, but the wider the tire that you run, the wider the rim is going to need to be. If you go all the way to the limit, and look at like fat bike tires with like a 5-inch wide tire, you're looking at rims that are 80, 100 millimeters wide, which is crazy. So there is that correlation between the tire width and the rim width, and you don't want to get either of those too far out of whack. You know, if you try to put a 5-inch tire on a regular mountain bike rim, it's not going to work.
You flop over in berms. And
there's probably not even room for the bead.
Right. Yeah. I would like to see that though. We should try that. Take a picture, put it on Instagram.
Put it on a road bike.
Yeah. So real quickly, I want to just talk about wheel troubleshooting and repair. So if people are having issues with their wheel, they can kind of diagnose it and figure out what to do next. So wobble, like if you spin your wheel and you notice the thing is kind of wobbling side to side or doesn't look straight, what does that usually mean, and what do you need to do to fix it?
So it could mean that you have a loose spoke on one side, or your wheel is coming out around, which is loosening one of your spokes. Because as the wheel starts to look more like an egg, the spokes in certain parts will be shorter and looser now. Or not shorter, but they'll be loose.
Yeah.
Anyhow, if you just have an average wobble, you can often tighten the spoke on the opposite side and pull your rim toward that direction and straighten it back out.
Yeah. And sometimes it can be your tire too. You know, if you notice that you have that wobble, like don't assume that, oh my gosh, it's something bad. Like I'm gonna have to get a new wheel, or even have to mess with spokes if you're not real comfortable with that. A lot of times it can be the tire, like the tire itself could have a bubble in it or the tube or whatever. So there's a lot of stuff it could be. So I don't know. I usually start with the tire for me, honestly. Like that seems to be the thing that's going to break first, or that's going to cause a wobble. What about a wheel that's slow spinning? Like it seems like it's grinding, or like you hold up, let's say the front end, and you spin the wheel and it just slows down really quickly, doesn't keep going. What is that going to mean?
For me, I always check to see if the brake pads are contacting the rotor initially. But it also could just be your hub bearings. Maybe the cones are too tight, or maybe your bearings are shot and you need to get some new ones. Yeah.
Jero, you just shared a good article about how to replace the bearings in your front wheel. It didn't look too bad, that process.
Yeah, it's pretty straight ahead. It requires a couple of specific tools you can either make with stuff from the hardware store, or you can buy some bearing drifts so that you make sure things go in straight and the pressure is all applied in the right place so you don't mess up the hub.
Right.
Some other things that can happen to cause a wheel to spin slowly is your bearing preload can be too tight. So on the hubs that have that setting, you might want to check that as well. And also with brand new wheels, sometimes things just need to break in. Some wheels have really heavy bearing grease, and so they'll spin a little slower at first, but eventually they'll break in and spin a lot faster.
Yeah, cool. And then what about if you're having trouble seating a tire in a wheel? I know we've all been there before, struggled, like, why won't this tire go in this rim? Are there things that could be wrong with the rim, or is it usually the tire? What have you guys found?
I mean, it definitely could be the tire. It's just I messed around with like some downhill tires last year, and just because the sidewalls are so thick, it takes like a whole lot of pressure to actually get them to push out to the bead. And sometimes like the rim channel designs, like Stan's makes theirs really easy to where it's like just a really shallow rim channel that makes it easier for a tire to push out and sort of seat tubeless.
Yeah, and sometimes there's also the issue of a tire being too old and kind of baggy, and they just won't get tight enough, and you can try adding another layer of tape to the rim. Sometimes that'll take care of it, and you'll be able to get a little more life out of the tire, but sometimes you just need a new tire.
Yeah, what about like chips and things like that, especially, I don't know, with carbon, or you can get dings in your alloy rims as well. Does that affect the tire, like how it's going to seat in there? I guess you could be losing pressure for one thing, like if there's like a little nick in the rim. And also, again, yeah, you're going to have a hard time getting the bead to seat in there.
Yeah, I've definitely had to put my rim in a vise before and kind of straighten out the edges of it to get it to where the tire would hook up with it again. There's a whole podcast worth of tricks on how to try and make that work. but it's usually possible unless, I mean, when the rim's cooked, you'll know it, but if it's just a little ding, you can probably fix it.
Good to know. All right. Well, I think that's been a pretty comprehensive explanation and overview of how mountain bike wheels work. If you have specific questions about working on your bike or trying to troubleshoot a wheel set or really any part of your bike, we'd love to hear your questions. Feel free to post them on the Singletracks forums. You can hit us up over email. I'm Jeff at Singletracks. We got Matt at Singletracks.com and Jero at Singletracks.com, Gerow. And yeah, send us your questions, and then maybe we can do a whole episode where we answer some of your repair questions or questions about how stuff works on the bike. And if you're enjoying the Singletracks podcast, we'd love to have you rate us online, and that'll help other people find the Singletracks podcast as well.